I'm Bill Current, founder of the Current Consulting Group. Welcome to this edition of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. And I'm joined today by Yvette Farnsworth Baker. She is an attorney and she works at Current Consulting Group with doing a whole lot of different things for us. Because one of the things that we do at Current Consulting Group is we write drug testing policies. They're always customized to each individual company's needs, depending on the state laws that they're in. And we're going to talk about that today as well, because it's hard to imagine a one-size-fits-all policy. And our policy writing services are geared specifically to the laws that apply to the various customers that we're working with. So we're going to talk about the importance of those issues today as well. Yvette, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. Good to be with you as always, Bill. So I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Florida. I'm a graduate of Brigham Young University and Georgetown Law School, and I've been a practicing attorney for more years than I am willing to claim at this point. And I've been working with the Current Consulting Group for about 9 years now, focusing on state drug testing laws, case laws, keeping up to date on new legislation, and particularly in the last 5 years on state marijuana laws. And I still practice law in the state of Florida, and as well as my work consulting with Current Consulting Group.
So, for example, if a company comes to Current Consulting Group and they have state law questions, we typically send them to Yvette or to Catherine Miller, and they take care of. Catherine manages our state drug testing law database called Current Compliance. But a lot of those questions go straight to Yvette. Companies that come to us and ask us to put together a database of specific laws, like how do legal marijuana laws affect drug testing in these 10 states, that typically goes to Yvette to do that. And one of the questions that we get asked most commonly, the most frequent question we get asked is, I'm a multi-state employer. Which state law applies to my company when I put my drug testing policy together? How would you answer that question, Yvette?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's not an easy answer. But I know a lot of companies think, well, I can use the law where we're headquartered, pardon me, and that'll apply to all our companies. All our different employees across the country. And unfortunately, that's not the case. If you're a multi-state employer, you have to have a multi-state policy so that the different states where you have employees, those state laws are all built into your policy.
So there's really no one-size-fits-all policy.
There's no one-size-fits-all policy. There's not a blanket policy that's going to work in all 50 states. There's not even a blanket policy that's probably going to work in 3 or 4 states. Every policy for each different state needs to be tailored to those state laws.
So what are some of the issues that would come up that might require an addendum to a policy for different states?
So the biggest one this day is marijuana, medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. There are so many different state laws when it comes to marijuana, and different state laws on how the workplace is affected. In some states, marijuana might be legal, whether medical or recreational, but an employer is still within their rights to test for marijuana, to fire employees for positive tests, whether it's a positive test for recreational or a positive test for medical marijuana. In other states, you can discipline or dismiss an employee for testing positive for recreational marijuana, but not for medical marijuana. In other states, you can't discipline an employee unless you have proof that they were impaired by marijuana on the job. Rather than just having a positive marijuana test, you have to have some additional information before you can discipline that employee. And then we have a state like New York, which thankfully now is the only one of its kind so far, but marijuana testing period in New York is very, very limited. You can only test for marijuana in very limited circumstances in the state of New York. So a multi-state employer has to know the different marijuana laws in the states in which they operate, and not just whether marijuana is legal or not, but what laws are there that affect how employers handle marijuana positives and marijuana testing in the workplace. So that's one of the biggest ones. When we come to other drug testing other than marijuana, employers need to know if they are under a mandatory law or a voluntary law. Voluntary laws provide certain benefits, but an employer isn't required to follow those laws. And those might have really specific testing regimens to follow, where you have to test in a certain manner and in certain circumstances in order to receive those benefits. And if an employer is receiving those voluntary law benefits, they need to know exactly how they need to test to receive those benefits. But in a different state, those requirements don't exist and they can test in a different manner. An employer needs to know if they can test using like an on-site instant test. Sometimes we call it point of care testing, or if it's testing that has to go through a laboratory, and there's different laws that can affect that. And then things like if they're required to do confirmation testing, if they're required to use a medical review officer, if they're allowed to do random testing, or if only reasonable suspicion testing or post-accident testing is permitted. All those sorts of things are affected by state laws and can be different from one state to the next.
So you've mentioned a lot of different kinds of laws. How does an employer know which laws apply to them?
Well, really, if it's possible, an employer should consult with a professional like us here at Current Consulting Group. This is what we do. And one of our services we offer are building policies for multi state employers, or just doing the research, going to an employment attorney, or doing the research yourself just to go through the laws, looking up the drug testing laws in the state, the marijuana laws in the state, maybe laboratory licensing laws if they want to do on-site testing, um, unemployment compensation or workers' compensation laws, just checking through all those laws and see what requirements they have that are going to affect that employer.
And one of the really hot issues right now are these new laws in California and Washington that just went into effect that have a direct impact on workplace drug testing. Would a company, maybe a multi state employer with operations in 30 states, for example, but also in California or California and Washington, would they typically want to update their policy with these new laws in effect?
They have to update their policies if they're operating in California. In addition to 30 other states or the state of Washington, they are going to be required to update their policies and make sure they're in compliance with these new laws. So, like I said, some laws are voluntary and are just offering benefits. There are a lot of laws, particularly marijuana laws, that are mandatory, and employers have got to comply with those laws, or they're facing, possible litigation for wrongful termination of an employee down the road.
And how often or how frequently do you think a company should review and update their policy?
So I usually recommend to review the policy every year. One thing that we do at Current Consulting Group, you mentioned Catherine Miller and I focus on state laws. She and I, every month, we go through state legislation and see what new laws have passed, what new laws have been introduced. And so to our clients, we send out a monthly newsletter updating everyone on different state laws that have passed that might apply. We categorize them by state so you can read through and check the states in which you operate. But absolutely, an employer should be checking yearly and reviewing their policy and make sure they're up to date, and just following the news and see if you hear about new legislation, then it's time, at that point for sure to review your policy.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Yvette, that was a lot of good information in a quick format. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Any last comments?
No, just to remember that one size does not fit all. There's just not a way that you're going to do this quick and easy, because on one hand, getting the wrong policy, you're facing litigation from disgruntled employees. On the other hand, you're facing employees being on the job while impaired and not catching drug positives, alcohol positives in the workplace, which again, facing litigation, but also facing like serious injury and damage to the workplace. So there's not an easy solution, unfortunately. On either hand, you're at risk, but it really isn't as hard as it sounds like to get the right policy to be, in a legally defensible and legally sound position with your workplace drug testing policy.
Well, thank you very much, Yvette. And thank you all for joining us for this edition of Currently Speaking. For more information about how to contact Yvette, we'll put the information right up on the screen so you can find it. And if you have any further questions, just email either myself or Yvette. Our email addresses are on the screen, and we'd be happy to respond to any questions you have about state drug testing laws. Thank you very much, and that concludes this edition of Currently Speaking.